This is my third interview with Steve Taylor, a senior professor of psychology and author of a plethora of best-selling books on psychology and spirituality. Today we're discussing Steve's book, Time Expansion Experiences, The Psychology of Time Perception and the Illusion of Linear Time. This is a fascinating look at the nature of time and what it can tell us about reality. Scroll into the description for timestamps, extra info, and useful links. And if you enjoy this video, please like, comment, and share. Thank you. Thank you for doing this to me again, Steve. I've been looking forward to talking about your book, your upcoming book, Time Expansion Experiences, The Psychology of Time Perception and the Illusion of Linear Time, since I realized you were publishing it. I think it was in your newsletter and the cover was there, and a very eye-catching cover. It's probably on screen right now and people are thinking the same thing. Anyway, I've been looking forward to talking about it. To begin with, please tell me about the experience that you had. I think it was a car crash that was the genesis of this book that kind of inspired or led to this book in a way.
It was almost exactly 10 years ago, 2014. My wife and I was driving, my wife was in the passenger seat. We were in the middle of a mid lane of a motorway. Mm-hmm. And there was a truck on the inside lane. I was actually overtaking the truck, but he hadn't seen me. And he tried to move into the middle lane. And he did actually move into the middle lane. He clipped our car. And our car started to spin round straight away. He clipped it again. And we span even faster. And immediately, as soon as we heard the first noise, everything went into slow motion. I remember hearing this noise, and then there seemed to be a very long pause. And I said to my wife, "What was that noise?" And then there was another long pause, and the car started to spin round very slowly. And I remember looking behind and being able to see with strange clarity the faces. I saw the shocked faces of in the cars behind us. And I could see the rows of cars stretching behind us on the motorway. And I also felt this strange sense of calmness. You always imagine that when something like that happens, you'll panic. But I felt this strange calmness. I was very logical and thinking, well, this is dangerous. I need to try and do something about this. Maybe I can improve the situation. Mm-hmm. So I got hold of the steering wheel, tried to steer us towards the hard shoulder. I put the brakes on, handbrake, or did all these various things. I'm not sure whether they made any difference, but I felt like I had the ability to take some preventative action.
Yeah,
but it was just strange how slow everything was, and also everything went very quiet. Everything was kind of muffled. The external sounds were muffled. But anyway, we span round. It seemed like several times. Probably only took a few seconds in reality because we were going. I think it was about 60 miles an hour. And I thought this is we're going to die. It was a busy motorway. Cars were all around us, so it didn't seem like there seemed to be no way that we would escape serious danger, serious injury. But amazingly, we span in the direction of the hard shoulder, and we just smashed into the crash barrier. And I remember straight away, sound erupted again. I heard noises again. Straight away, time seemed to slip back into its normal mode. And then I looked at my wife and thought she's not injured. And I looked at me and thought, I'm not injured. I thought, wow, we've survived without any injury. Amazing. But yeah, the strange thing was that in reality, it was probably just a few seconds, maybe 4 or 5 seconds. Mm-hmm. But in my mind, it was much, much longer. I'd probably estimate about 30 to 40 seconds. And, like I say, there was these strange elements, like the strange calmness that I had and the strange, sort of strangely heightened perception as well.
Wow. And what kind of impact did that have on you after as well?
Well, we had to buy a new car. The car was completely smashed to pieces. But I felt, more seriously, I felt this elation. Actually, it was really nice because the driver was incredibly distraught. The truck driver, it was a Polish guy. And he said, I just couldn't see you because of where the mirror was or whatever it was. There was like a blind spot if you're driving on the other side of the car. And he was incredibly apologetic. He was crying because he thought he'd endangered our lives. And we hugged at the end, once the police arrived and we took each other's details, we hugged and went our separate ways. So that was quite nice. But I felt this amazing sense of appreciation and elation, the appreciation for the gift of life. But in a more long-term sense, it encouraged me to research these experiences as a psychologist.
Yeah.
So 2 or 3 years later, I began to collect reports of these experiences from other people.
Awesome. And how many reports have you managed to collect at this point?
Well, initially I collected about, I think it was 93, and I wrote a paper. I analyzed all the reports and, applied standard psychological research
Mm-hmm.
procedures to them. And they were published as a paper back in 2021. But since then, I've written a lot of popular articles on websites and in magazines. So people have continued to send me lots of examples.
Yeah.
So I've probably got, I don't know exactly, but it's over 250 reports of these experiences in my database.
Yeah, that's awesome. And whilst I guess most people listening might not be able to think of somebody they know that had this experience like by name or be able to recall one themselves, I think we've all heard in our life at some point somebody tell us some kind of traumatic experience, and they kind of where time seemed like it slowed down, time was like time paused for a minute, and all this kind of thing, which alludes to the same idea. And then we also have these phrases in the English language such as like time flies when you're having fun. And it's like watching paint dry, which implies that, you know, like something particularly boring makes it seem even slower, the passing of time. So all these kind of ideas point towards the same idea of perception of time, which is what you're getting at with this book. I guess perception of time can be affected by essentially an infinite number of external variables and also variables like inside our mind as well. Yeah. Is there anything you want to say about any of that? And if not, I want to ask you to define time expansion experiences. In general.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, we tend to assume that time is something objective and fixed, but it's not like that at all. It's completely flexible, completely variable. We have all these sayings, the ones you just mentioned, and also things like time flies when you're having fun. They all attest to the fact that time varies in different states of mind. So in the first chapter of the book, I discussed some of the standard ways in which time varies. Like, for example, it speeds up as you get older. It slows down when you're bored or in pain. It speeds up when you're in a state of absorption and enjoying yourself. It slows down when you're in new environments and have unfamiliar experiences. So there are some sort of standard psychological principles behind all of those modes of time perception. Mostly it's related to information processing, that the more information you take in, the slower time seems to pass. That's why newness makes time slow down, because you're processing a lot of new perceptions, processing a lot of new information. But the main focus of my book goes beyond those experiences. They're quite mild fluctuations. When you're bored, time slows down. But it doesn't slow down to a massive extent. But we know when you have a car accident, the effect is completely on a different level. It's like you're talking like time slowing down by massive orders of magnitude, 30 or 40 times, or even more in other states of consciousness or other situations. So the time expansion experiences I'm talking about go beyond the kind of everyday variations of time perception.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you said then, though, that is an everyday one that just is a really kind of thought-provoking is the idea of, time going faster as we age. And that's something, again, that everybody told us that when we were young, right? Like that it's going to keep going faster and you're not going to see the years pass by. And we're like, yeah, okay. But then it happens. And so what is that about? How come that does seem to consistently happen to everybody? Why is that? Is it just because, as you kind of alluded to, we're so much busier and there's so much more going on in our lives and we have so many more people to think about and, et cetera, that we don't have time to be present and experience the moment? Is that something to do with it? Is there any other reasons?
That's part of it. I mean, one standard theory, which a lot of people allude to, is you could call it the kind of geometric or the proportional theory that when you're 4 years old, a year is 25% of your whole life. So it seems like an enormous block of time. But when you're 40, a year is like, I can't think of my mathematics.
2.5% maybe?
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah.
So it's not such a big proportion of your life. It seems less significant. Yeah. But I think there may be something to that, but I don't think that's the main factor because we don't actually live our lives like that. We don't live our lives in relation to all of the time that's gone previously. We live our lives kind of in a more immediate basis in terms of a day-to-day or a moment-to-moment experience. But I think it's to do with information processing. If you imagine, remember when you were a child, everything around you is new and interesting because it's all unfamiliar. You're like an alien who's landed on a different planet. So your attention is continually being it's continually focusing on all the newness around you. So you're taking in all of this information, and all this information is stretching time for you. And as you get older, the world becomes more familiar. There's less and less newness in your life. You repeat experiences rather than having new experiences. And also, I think there's a part of our minds which kind of switches off to reality. It switches off to isness or newness. It
Yeah.
kind of turns it to familiarity. So when we become adults, that mechanism begins to take hold. And together with the lack of newness in our lives, and there's more routine, more repetition, it has the effect of speeding up time. We are absorbing progressively less information, if you like.
Mhm.
And that applies, mathematically year on year, there's progressively less newness. It's not
Yeah.
inevitable, by the way. I think that we can do things about, as I mentioned in the book, there are certain things we can do to stop that process.
Yeah, and I guess that also kind of goes back to your book, The Adventure, where there's like being in the present and being grateful, and all of these things can help us to, I guess, maximize the minutes of the day and to feel like we lived more full, rich,
Mm.
experiences and days, and which will add up to weeks and months and years, of course.
That's right. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
one sort of simple practical thing we can do is to make sure there's always newness in our lives. To keep make sure there's a flow of unfamiliarity in our lives. So expose
Hmm.
ourselves to new information, new environments, new people. That will
Yeah.
definitely help to, minimize the speeding up of time. But I think more importantly, it's a question of perception. If we perceive our environments in a clear and fresh way, in a kind of mindful way, that has the same effect. You don't need to go anywhere. You can just be in your normal environment. But if you perceive it in a fresh, mindful way,
Hmm.
it also offsets the speeding up of time.
Yeah. So again, go back to the title of the book, Time Expansion Experiences. So when you say that, you said you're not referring necessarily to the kind of watching paint dry and just having a fun party and being like, oh wow, that flew past. Of course, you're not talking about that kind of thing. You're talking about things like car crashes, these traumatic experiences. Can you give some other examples of the situations that these experiences might arise within, that are kind of, maybe to begin with, like more normal, kind of everyday? Obviously a car crash is not normal and not every day, but to a certain extent it is.
Mhm.
So in the sense, like, it's different to a near-death experience, like in a sense that we'll get to a bit later. But yeah, is there any
Mhm.
other, what kind of things can you highlight for now?
According to my research, around a half of all time expansion experiences occur in accidents of some form. So
Hmm.
mostly that's car accidents, but it can be a lot of falls as well. People often report them in falls.
Interesting.
These can be very dramatic falls. It can be like mountaineers who fall
Mm.
20, 30 meters or more. They experience a strange slowing of time. Sometimes they have a life review too, which maybe we'll speak about later.
Yeah.
But it can occur in very mundane falls, like if you're, a fall down a flight of stairs, or even a fall onto the pavement, which takes probably, a split second or half a second of normal time. People often say that, um, even though in reality, only a few seconds may take place, maybe even less than a few seconds. They feel they have ample time to position themselves to take some preventative action to make sure that they're not seriously injured, even if
Hmm.
that's just a fall onto the pavement. They feel as though they can position themselves to avoid serious injury. So I mean, that's one of the main features of these experiences, that people feel that they have the opportunity to take preventative action.
Hmm.
And then I have a chapter on time expansion in sport. There are a lot of sports people report moments when time slows down. Maybe a tennis player, could be a race. Quite frequently in motor racing, Formula One drivers. And these moments, I guess it's associated with what athletes call the zone.
Yeah.
Part of being in the zone is a slowing down of time. So you have there's a strange slowness which enables you to avoid not injury. Enables you to position yourself. Do you have more time to take your shot, to avoid your opponent's legs if you're a footballer, for example? So my theory is that the very, the most brilliant sports people, the sort of highest performing sports people, and probably only a tiny percentage, probably we're talking about 0.2% of professional athletes, probably, they have the ability to slip into this zone state almost at will, or even, it may even be their normal state. So they actually perceive time more slowly than other people, than other competitors. And it gives them an amazing advantage, because they do have the ability to avoid their opponent's shots or tackles or whatever, they do have more time to position themselves. So it's an amazing benefit for sports people. Then also, there's a chapter on the book about spiritual time expansion, and that includes psychedelics. Generally, the effect of psychedelics is to slow down time dramatically, but not just, I would call those psychedelic awakening experiences. But awakening experiences can occur in a lot of other situations. They can occur during or after meditation, while walking in the countryside, after sex, lots of different contexts. But, whenever we shift into an awakening experience, our time perception changes radically. Sometimes time can even, seem to disappear. The idea that there is a future or a past completely fades away. There's only this incredibly intense present moment. Or there may even be, in some spiritual experiences, a sense that all time is here in the now, that the whole of the future, the whole of the past are here in the present. And so the future somehow becomes accessible because it's part of the present, almost as if time becomes spatial, like a landscape.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of, on one level, there are what I call time expansion experiences. But when we talk about spiritual or awakening experiences, we also move into the realm of what I call time cessation experiences.
You read my mind. I was literally about to go to that straight after.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Please carry on.
Yeah, well, so in time cessation experiences, there are two forms, actually, of time cessation experiences. You could call them no time and all time. So in a typical deep spiritual experience, a kind of mystical experience in deep meditation, time just disappears. There is what the mystics call the eternal now. And people report this in near-death experiences too, that time just, I've asked people who've had near-death experiences, how long do you think it lasted in terms of your subjective time? How long did these experiences last? And they sometimes say, I can't tell you because time just disappeared. It became completely meaningless. It was as if the idea of time just deconstructed. There was no time at all. So that's one type of time cessation. And the other type of time cessation is when, all time seems to be included in the present. And again, this sometimes happens in near-death experiences where people can see the future and the past becomes alive again. Not in terms of memory or in terms of anticipation, but it actually is there. The future and the past are present in the now. So that's essentially what a time cessation experience is.
Yeah, awesome. Obviously, I want to talk more about some of these elements like NDEs and all of that and how time comes into that. Just I wanted to ask you briefly, do any of your reports include has anybody reported having this kind of time slowing experience or whatever way they've described it when receiving, for example, like traumatic news, like so an emotional experience rather than a physical one?
Yeah,
you have.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's another category. I include that in the category of accidents and emergencies.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sometimes like in one of my reports, the person was diagnosed with cancer. She received the news and she just said that, time just froze. It literally did stand still.
Yeah.
Sometimes when people are told that partners have died, so that kind of traumatic situations like that can freeze time as well. And in a sense, it's not dissimilar to a traffic accident because it's an incredible shock. It's an acute shock. And I link it to altered states of consciousness. I think the essential thing about accident situations or falls, and this also applies to traumatic situations when you're told terrible news, tragic news, it's an acute shock which shifts you into an altered state, of consciousness.
Yeah.
And in that altered state of consciousness, time behaves in a completely different way to normal.
Yeah. And do these things frequently, do people experience other phenomena at the same time as having this time experience? Like I'm thinking the first one that comes to mind is an out of body experience. Did that come up many in the reports that you've gone through?
Not so much, only really in the context of near death experiences. People sometimes describe near-death experiences as beginning with an out-of-body experience. Also in psychedelics, people sometimes describe the kind of out-of-the-body sensation, but not so much, um, in terms of an out-of-body experience as an isolated experience in itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, well, let's talk about the NDEs then. So how many NDEs have you, they're included in your 250 reports? Like how many of them were NDEs? And yeah, I guess I'd love to get onto the life review, but we can get to that in a minute if you want to talk in general more about NDEs first.
Well, not so many. There are only 7 or 8 out of the 250 experiences. And I guess, that makes sense in a way because near-death experiences, they're not uncommon, but they're not as common as traffic accidents um, or meditation experiences in which time shifts into a different mode.
Yeah, and it's also, just to jump in, I guess it's also when somebody that's had a near-death experience is thinking about their experience, the time thing is maybe not the first thing that comes to mind. So when they see your thing, they don't necessarily associate it straight away, but it's there on the other layer. Whereas the person that had the car crash, that's their overwhelming thing. It's like, whoa, I still can't believe how I experienced time in that moment. But yeah, sorry, please carry on.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. I mean, like as I said before, time, it becomes insignificant in some near-death experiences. I mean, literally, near-death experiences can last for a few seconds or maybe a few minutes at the most before a person begins to experience brain death or, and does physically die. There's only a sort of window of a few minutes at the most. So, occasionally people report those few minutes as seeming to last for days. In some near-death experiences, time expansion is so extreme, much more extreme than any accident or even any psychedelic experience. It becomes so extreme that, a few minutes can seem to last several days or even longer, maybe even a fortnight. And sometimes when people are in a deep coma, maybe for several days, those several days can seem like years. They may be in a deep coma and yet have this intense conscious experience, which is similar to a near-death experience. And that can seem to last for literally years. So we're talking about a time expansion that goes into hundreds or even thousands, an incredibly extreme time expansion experience. But as you said before, in some near-death experiences, people can't talk about them in terms of time because time just disappears. It becomes completely meaningless. That idea of measuring an experience in temporal terms just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I think that's right. I think the temporal aspect just doesn't seem important to some people.
Which kind of feels a little bit similar to the idea of dreams as well. I know that's not like what you've been looking at here, but if you think about, sometimes you have like a night where you have so many different dreams and you remember maybe bits of them and you can kind of piece it together, and seemingly those experiences, if played out in real life, would have been, again, days or at least way more hours than you've been asleep. But again, so I don't know whether our dreams break it up or is time working differently for our state of consciousness while we're in dream, It's interesting.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, it's quite simple, really. It's linked to altered states of consciousness.
Yeah.
Our normal time perception is dependent on our normal consciousness. So, and that's why, our normal perception of time is kind of a fast-flowing linear time, increasingly fast-flowing as we get older. But as soon as you shift into an altered state of consciousness, and it depends on how altered it is, there are lots of degrees of altered states of consciousness. A mild altered state of consciousness brings a mild time expansion. But if you shift into a radically different state of consciousness, like a psychedelic state or a near-death experience, then the time expansion can become correspondingly extreme. So yeah, I think basically as soon as dreaming is also an altered state of consciousness. So you'd expect there to be time distortion, or not distortion is probably the wrong word, but time expansion, maybe radical time contraction as well in some dreams.
Yeah, it's interesting, and so obviously again the life review is something that you mentioned, and something that people talk about, where they basically say that they had all the experiences, or I guess it's different for everybody. Some people report having all the experiences in their life kind of play for them. Sometimes people say like, essentially simultaneously, or but they were able to understand and consume everything. It's a really fascinating aspect of like NDEs. But yeah, so tell me what you think we can learn from that, and what you've learned from that from these reports and your research.
Life reviews are probably the most radical form of time expansion of all.
Yeah.
Because in real terms, or in normal terms, life reviews may last for just a few seconds.
Mm-hmm.
But in subjective terms, a person can actually relive every experience of their lives, literally every experience of their life. And it's not just a question of memory, it's a question of actually reliving the experiences. People often report in life reviews that, they often say that it's much more vivid than normal memory, and they can, they actually relive situations that they've forgotten about, which were not in their memory. And they can often recall or relive situations from multiple perspectives, from other people's perspectives, almost as if they've become telepathic. And occasionally they have visions of the future too. They have a life preview with some future experiences, which obviously they don't recognize at the time. But later on in life, they think, oh wow, this is what happened in my life preview, my life review.
Yeah.
So it's just incredible that a whole lifetime of experience can be relived in a matter of a few seconds. I mean, that's one type of life review anyway. There are a couple of slight variations. In some life reviews, people they relive the most significant experiences of their life. So it may just be a sort of snapshot of 10 or 15 significant experiences of their lives. And it's also quite common for people to have like a panoramic life review, where it's not like life doesn't flash before their eyes. It's just there. Their lives are there as a kind of panorama, almost as if, again, it's like a landscape where every experience of their life is there, just sort of laid out before them in a landscape, sometimes including future experiences too. So in that point, in that sort of spatial type of life review, that kind of makes more sense, because they don't need to, although that experience does not need to be replayed in a few seconds, because it's just there as a kind of panorama. They can just survey the panorama. Again, that's going to be impossible to do that in a few seconds, but it kind of makes more sense when you think about spatial rather than linear time.
Mm-hmm. And the mountain climber stuff that you mentioned is fascinating too. I know that sometimes mountain climbers, when they have a fall and they're not in any physical, obviously, like they're not physically compromised, they haven't hit their head or anything like that, they're just kind of sliding down a mountain. Sometimes they can have like a near-death experience as well, like induced by this kind of the trauma, the emotional aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And so they also have this time expansion experience. I just think it's fascinating. There's also this third man syndrome. Have you come across that with like mountain climbers feeling like they have somebody else? It's not necessarily related to this, but it just made me think of it with the mountains and everything.
Yeah, I've heard about that, but it didn't really come up in my research, but I've definitely heard about it in another context. I mean, one of the most amazing things that mountain climbers comment on is the sense of unbelievable calm and well-being they have, even though they're just about to smash, they may be just about to smash into rocks, and for all they know, they're shortly going to die. But they feel this amazing sense of well-being and calm, which is a common feature of all time expansion experiences, really. It was definitely a feature of my own. And, it's kind of remarkable that even when people are so close to death or serious injury, at least, they feel this amazing sense of calmness and well-being, that they comment on the beauty around them. Like, I've heard people who were in car accidents comment on the beauty of the glass of the windscreen shattering and flowing into the air. Spreading into the air, and the beauty of the wreckage of the cars spread out on the road, and things that you wouldn't expect to be described as beautiful, but it's quite amazing.
Definitely. If we're purely like biological machines, as materialism or physicalism wants us to believe, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense that is our survival instinct, that its last few seconds where it wants to stay alive is just admiring the beauty and feeling calm. And
that's true. I mean, you could say there is one sort of potential kind of evolutionary explanation of time expansion experiences.
Mm-hmm.
It is because they do, almost everybody who has a time expansion experience in some form of accident situation, and this applies to sports people too, they always comment on the feeling that they have the ability to take preventative action to minimize danger. And it's very real. In many cases, people do say that they were able to position themselves, they were able to sort of cover themselves or to hide or to take to take preventative action of some form. And many people said that it allowed them to stay alive, that they would have died if they hadn't taken this preventative action.
Yeah.
And we're talking about, actions which took place in just 3 or 4 seconds. So when people's mind, they had much more time to take this preventative action. So I guess one possible explanation is that we've evolved this ability, kind of, in response to natural disasters or to natural dangers. We've evolved this ability to shift into an altered state of consciousness where time slows down in order to enhance our survival, because we do have this ability to take preventative action.
Yeah,
that's a possibility.
Yeah. Are there any other kind of phenomena that you think is worth mentioning right now where these kind of experiences frequently occur? So like you've mentioned, obviously, psychedelic experiences. I don't know if we mentioned, but I think meditative experiences would be there. Near-death experiences. We've obviously talked about traumatic, normal kind of life events like car crashes, falls, accidents, emergencies. Is there anything we've kind of missed? Any glaring, things that you want to bring up?
Those are the main areas which I cover in the book. I also mention a few negative type experiences where time can slow down. That there are some psychiatric conditions in which time slows down massively. Like schizophrenia is often associated with a slowing down of time.
Really?
I mean, these days, schizophrenia is often described in terms of temporal distortion. But because people are usually in a distress state, in a state of disturbance, it becomes very painful. The slowing of time becomes a real problem, because it just extenuates people's suffering. It extends their suffering. And also, I have a section on dementia as well, or Alzheimer's, because that's also a temporal condition. One of the features of Alzheimer's or dementia is that people are unable to be in the present. They're being pulled away constantly to different times of their lives. They seem to be unable to focus in the present. If you speak to people with dementia, they're often talking to people from their past or talking to strangers who are not present. And it seems to be because they're shifting out of the present tense into a kind of disorderly, non-temporal realm. So those are sort of, I guess you could call them negative time expansion or time cessation experiences.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I wouldn't have thought to kind of mention any of those, like dementia or Alzheimer's, in this context, but you're right. It's kind of the same, it's the same principle, isn't it? It's the same. It's that it's being affected by time, and it's related to time and everything like that. But yeah, really.
The only other one is that, by the way, it's a hypnosis. There are sort of some incredibly strange time distortions that can take place under hypnosis, depending on the instructions which the hypnotist gives the subject.
Yeah.
But there have been lots of cases where the hypnotist has managed to slow down time to the point where a person can accomplish amazingly complex tasks in a very short space of time.
Wow. Really? Have you got an example in mind?
There were two famous American psychologists, Milton and Erickson, in the 1950s. They conducted a series of time distortion experiments under hypnosis. And there was a woman who had a hobby of designing dresses. I think she worked as a secretary, but she was sort of a secret ambition was to be a dress designer. And they managed to slow down her sense of time. They used a metronome. They would sort of tell the person that this was a standard metronome beating at per second, once per second. But they would actually slow down the metronome so that it was beating only once every minute or every 5 minutes or something. So a person could be persuaded into thinking that a few seconds lasted 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So in those few seconds, this woman was able to produce incredibly complex dress designs in her mind. And afterwards, she would draw what she had worked out in her mind. Other people were able to solve complex mathematical problems in a few seconds that would normally take an hour or so. Wow. So, it was really quite remarkable.
Yeah, that is. It shows again, like the power of the mind and of perception and all that kind of thing. What you believe is possible.
It shows you the flexible, variable nature of time as well. Time perception is literally a facet of consciousness that can be changed if our consciousness changes.
Yeah, Yeah, definitely. I mean, we can feel it sometimes on a kind of everyday level, in the sense of some days feel, yeah, like they go faster, and some days you want to hold on to the day, but you just can't. Wait, the opposite. Sorry, some days you want to hold on to the day and you can't because it's moving too fast, and other days you can't wait for the day to be over, but it just drags forever and ever, and they can go by based on what's happening in our lives or what we're thinking and everything like that. Maybe how we slept. So many different things can influence it. I don't know if you've looked into at all in regards to this, like the UFO phenomenon, UAP, and this kind of taboo area of it being the abduction phenomenon.
No, I've not looked into it. No.
No. Okay. Well, I mean, it's something maybe.
Tell me more about it. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, like, Dr. John Mack of Harvard, he looked into this when he was alive, obviously. This was something he was very interested in. There's been multiple people research this. Obviously, it's a kind of, quite a taboo area of discussion, being abductions and that kind of thing. But missing time is frequently reported in these experiences. So, like, people, they'll see a UFO, and then they'll kind of realize the next day that, like, they're traveling or something, and they have 40 minutes that's like totally unaccounted for or something along those lines, and then they'll kind of dig into these memories either under hypnosis, which obviously can be questionable, or these will kind of gradually just come back to them, and they'll realize, I think I had a different kind of experience then, an abduction type experience, and they report that kind of thing. And anyway, the missing time element is incredibly common with that, and I think probably the time expansion, time slowing down is probably also very related as well. I'm sure that comes up too, but the missing time thing, I figured I've heard that a lot in regards to that phenomenon. So yeah,
fascinating. I'll look into that. But yeah, it sounds. I guess again, it's a kind of radically altered state of consciousness in which time behaves in a very strange way.
Yeah. If you do want to look into it, there'll be multiple books and stuff, and I could send you one that I'll recommend that is somebody I've interviewed on the show, and he's a good guy. He's Ralph Blumenthal. He wrote the biography of Dr. John Mack. Right. So it's a good way to kind of learn. You're familiar with Dr. John Mack? He was a Harvard psychiatrist.
Yeah, I read about him. Yeah,
really interesting guy, really interesting career. And anyway, I recommend that book. It's called The Believer.
Right.
It's about Dr. John Mack and his work, and his. It's in a large part about this abduction stuff, because Dr. John Mack spent a lot of time looking into that and researching it. Anyway, I recommend you to check that out. You'll probably find it interesting.
Sounds great.
Yeah, again, it's kind of has some things in similar with the NDE and with time and everything along those lines. From your research and from talking to people and from your own experiences, does one's perception of time change after going through a spiritual awakening, after becoming spiritually awakened?
Yeah, there can be temporary changes, or sometimes there can be a permanent shift in time perception. I mean, one of the most common features is a sense of presence. I guess that's quite a sort of not a particularly major shift, but a kind of an ongoing shift into the present. No longer being concerned with the future and the past. It's a question of focus, a question of orientation. People become much more orientated in the present, and as a result their lives become richer, because their perceptions become more intense. They have more appreciation of the phenomena around them and the people around them. But also in some cases, particularly when people have a more intense form of spiritual awakening, they often do report a slowed down sense of time. They just feel that there is more time to do things. And one person actually said that, since my shift, 24 hours just seems like such a long time. A normal day just seems massively expanded. Not in a bad way, but in a kind of pleasant way, because she just felt that she had more time to do things and to relax and to rest. It's almost as if the pressure of time, the pressure of linear time, kind of faded away, because time opens up and life becomes less stressful. So that was quite common. Other people actually reported a sense that time just didn't exist anymore, just wasn't important anymore. Somehow the concept of time was deconstructed and had no importance to them. They were still able to function. They were still able to do what they needed to do in their daily lives. But, the concept of time just receded like a hallucination, which no longer affected them. So those changes can occur following a spiritual awakening.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It just keeps making me think of different things, like how our relationship to time changes just again as we age, and just in general it's like kind of up and down and all over the place, and it always feels different. Sometimes it's a friend, an enemy, whatever.
Yeah.
How do you find all of this relates to things like precognition and remote viewing the past, let's say, and all of these kind of stuff in regards to psi phenomena, which I know you're familiar with a lot of this stuff. So yeah, you've probably given this quite a bit of thought.
I have, yeah. And my feeling is that precognition makes complete sense in terms of the kind of model of time which I develop in my book.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it connects to time cessation experiences. It connects to experiences where time becomes spatial. And many people report this in near-death experiences, sometimes in psychedelic experiences, sometimes in other situations, in deep mystical experiences. They report this feeling that time becomes a panorama. The present and the past, the future and the past coexist with the present. And again, this is a standard feature of the life preview. You know, people, it's not uncommon for people to have visions of their future life, which they eventually recognize as authentic experiences. And you know, if you think of time as being essentially spatial rather than linear, then, and if time is kind of laid out around us as a landscape, so that the future is present and the past is still present, then precondition makes complete sense. You know, it makes complete sense that in certain states of consciousness, usually when we're asleep and dreaming, we have the ability to glimpse future experiences. You know, they're just there already as a part of the landscape of the universe. So occasionally we can glimpse these future experiences. I mean, there've been many laboratory scientific experiments with precognition, and overall they do show positive results, but not a massively significant positive results. You know, but you know, it is very significant in itself.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but precognition generally isn't something that you can induce or consciously replicate, consciously demonstrate. It has to happen usually in an altered state of consciousness, in a state of deep relaxation or a state of sleep.
Yeah.
That's when we seem to have access to this landscape of spatial time.
Yeah, and it's normally spontaneous and all of that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I compare it to like poetry or music. You can't put somebody in a laboratory and say, okay, write a poem or write a symphony now. They won't be able to do it. They have to wait for the right frame of mind. They have to wait for their creative flow to begin. So
Yeah.
it's very difficult to consciously engineer these experiences.
Do you think that like we're like having precognitive, dreams and thoughts and stuff way more often than we realize it, and yet it's just the fact that because the future is not determined, when we have a successful precognition, we're actually seeing one of many possible outcomes. It's just when that does come to fruition, we're like, oh, look, that I did, preconceive that. I was aware that was going to happen. And yet we're having maybe loads of other precognitions that just end up they end up not being the future that comes to pass in the end. Do you see what I'm getting at there with kind of
possibly? And I certainly think that we have more, we have precognitive dreams that we forget, that kind of disappear before we wake up.
Yeah.
But I mean, that you're touching on an important issue there, because I sort of discussed this in the book, that if time is spatial and the future already exists, does it mean that the future is predetermined? Does it mean that there is no free will? Because if the events of the future are already preordained, we have no choice but to follow what is preordained. But I think it's more sensible to think in terms of probability.
Yeah.
I think the future is not predetermined. There are lots of probabilities, and we do have some free will to alter the probabilities of the future. That's why in some precognitive dreams, people see themselves having an accident. They see themselves as sort of riding their bicycle into a tree or falling off a horse. So the next day, the person who's riding the bicycle, they think, oh my God, this is the tree I saw in my dream. So they steer away from the tree or whatever it may be. So that obviously suggests that the future is not predetermined, because, reality did not precisely follow the dream.
Yeah.
So I think, and this comes up in near-death experiences too, where people are told that if you return to your body this is the pattern your future will follow. But it's conditional. Obviously, if they don't decide to return to the body, then that future will not materialize. So, I mean, this fits with quantum physics too, that, we're
Yeah.
talking about probability
Yeah.
rather than just, what is determined.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I ask you what kind of modern physics does say about all of this stuff, are there any particularly interesting interesting cases, examples of people having these kind of experiences? Any that really stuck with you that you'd like to share?
You mean in terms of precognition
I
or...
mean, in terms of any of the kind of experiences like that you've written in your books. I mean, if there's something that comes to mind now in precognition, by all means, go with it. But I was meaning really
Mhm.
the kind of time expansion experiences, the the time slowing down and this kind of stuff. But
Mm.
whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, one that's just come to mind is a guy who had an experience which encompasses both, two different elements of time expansion experiences. There's a guy called David Ditchfield who I interviewed who had a near-death experience. He wrote a
Mm-hmm.
book about it, actually, so you may be familiar with it from his own book. But I interviewed him before his book came out, and he had this sort of terrible accident where he was seeing his friend off a train, and he stepped off the train after he said goodbye to her, and his coat was caught in the doors of the closing
Oh,
doors of the train. So he's pulled along the platform, it's kind of bouncing up and down like a rag doll, and then pulled under the train as it picked up speed. So he thought, obviously thought he was going to die, but he in a, in a sort of typical time expansion experience, he felt as though he had the ability to take preventative actions. So he sort of positioned himself to make sure to lessen the danger of the train banging into his head. He sort of crouched down, and he felt as though he was able to take that action. And later on, when the accident was investigated, it was found that there were just 12 seconds between the closing of the doors until the moment when the train passed over him. But he felt that those seconds were enormously elongated, that they were like minutes. And he tried all kinds of measures to take preventative action, and he had all these amazingly complex thought processes, thinking about other people and other periods of his life.
wow.
But another aspect of his experience was when the paramedics arrived and took him to hospital. He was losing a lot of blood. His arm was severed below the elbow, and he lost consciousness shortly before he arrived at hospital. And then he had a near-death experience. He had a kind of quite a traditional but incredibly remarkable near-death experience, which probably took place within a few seconds, maybe a minute or two of normal time. And the experience was so complex, so multifaceted, and so multi-layered that it took him hours and hours. He wrote a whole book about it because it was such an incredibly rich and it was a life-changing experience. He became a completely different person afterwards. It was a kind of spiritual awakening for him. So he illustrates both the traditional time expansion experience in terms of the accident and also a near-death experience. And
Yeah.
he was one of those people who you know, couldn't treat his near-death experience couldn't discuss it in temporal terms because he said the idea of time just disappeared. The concept of time completely disappeared. He felt
Mm.
as though he was in this kind of timeless, eternal realm way beyond normal consciousness.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. That's
Yeah,
the
an incredible story. And
I'm gonna have to look into his book and look into this guy in general. But yeah, what an experience! And the idea of it being 12 seconds long and him thinking of multiple different ways of like lessening the severity or by trying to get out of the situation and thinking of no, that one
yeah,
didn't work, try something else. And also, as you say, thinking about loved ones and other things, no doubt contemplating
yeah.
death.
Actually, there's
Um,
another experience which has just come to my mind actually.
yeah,
This
please.
is when a woman she was getting up one morning, going onto her balcony, and she saw intruders trying to force their way into the house. And her husband was just leaving to work, and he was grappling with the intruders.
Hmm.
And she remembered that she had a gun that her husband had given her for protection, which only fired blanks. So she went to get this gun, and she raised the gun. She was pregnant, by the way. She was like heavily pregnant, 7 months pregnant. And she realized as she raised the gun that one of the intruders was pointing a gun at her,
Oh,
and
really?
he fired the gun at her. And immediately time slowed down. So it was kind of like a Matrix-like thing where she felt as though the bullet was moving slowly towards her. And by coincidence, she'd seen a film the previous night in which somebody had made a decision that somebody actually said that if someone shoots at you, you immediately have to go down to the ground, to crouch down to the ground as soon as you hear the bullet. So she did that, but because she was pregnant, she had the time to think, oh well, I need to do this in the best way to minimize danger to my baby. So I can't fall on my stomach. I've got to roll around and fall on my side or my back. So this all took place within the millisecond that it took for the bullet to move towards her. So she actually felt as though she took evasive action from the bullet and fell in such a way that her baby was unharmed.
Wow. Yeah, that's really, really awesome.
Yeah, and she actually said that millisecond stretched out into several seconds in
Yeah.
her time perception.
Yeah, those examples do really kind of highlight or bring home the idea of how, this works, how this is in such a short period of time. You really are having, multiple thoughts, thinking of different, really interesting. What does modern physics say about the idea that nonlinear time could be an illusion?
Well, it fits quite well with Einstein's theories. But more specifically, it fits with the idea of the block universe, the idea that, space and time are interconnected. Mm-hmm. And time is actually like space. Time is kind of spread out in a giant block, the block universe, and that it's possible to, in theory, we don't move forward in our lives, we move across the block universe. So that kind of makes sense in terms of, it's a very spatial idea of time, kind of fits with the idea that the future and the past coexist alongside the present. And, and in theory, in precognition, we should be able to access the future. Now, I don't think the block universe theory permits precognition. It doesn't touch on the idea of precognition, but it sort of allows for it in a sense. But in general, in physics, the idea of linear time doesn't make any sense. There's only one law of physics which suggests linear time, which is the law of thermodynamics and entropy, because that suggests that processes decay over time. They start out in a state of order and gradually move towards greater entropy. But some physicists believe that the law of entropy is kind of only works on a kind of surface. It's not a kind of ground level. It's not kind of a basic fundamental law of reality. It's just a kind of superficial law of reality. And once you go into the quantum level, it doesn't apply anymore. But in quantum physics, the idea of time is very strange. That time is not fixed. The kind of the idea, we have this normal idea that the future, past, and present are separated, but in the quantum world, those kind of distinctions fade away. So in the same way that a particle is in theory nowhere until you observe it. It's only when it can be in kind of multiple possible places at the same time, but when you observe it, then you sort of pin it down to a specific location. And that applies to time as well, that, events are not located in time. They could be past, present, or future until you observe them. Then you pin them down in the present moment. But, before then, they could be anywhere in time. Yeah. And there's also a theory in physics or a phenomenon in physics called retrocausality, which is when events reach back into the past, or the past can affect the future can affect the present. The waves sort of flow backwards in time as well as forwards in time. So that, in one idea, events that take place in the present are a handshake between the future and the past. They're kind of like a compromise between the future and the past. So, yeah, I mean, certainly the ideas of physics, these ideas suggest that time is not flexible or uniform. It's kind of undetermined and variable.
Yeah. And what do you think about the idea that we can affect the past and that kind of thing?
I believe it. Yeah, I believe in in the same way that we can glimpse the future and possibly, we do affect the future. I believe that in theory we can return to the past, affect the past. I mean, that makes sense in terms of retrocausality in quantum physics. And there's also the phenomenon of retrocognition, which is when we actually, the equivalent phenomenon to precognition in the past, when we return to the past and actually not just recall in memory, but actually re-experience and relive past experiences. I think that happens a lot, but because it's kind of difficult to detach that from what we call normal memory. So we probably don't dwell on it as much as we do in cases of precognition. But I think retrocognition is probably quite a common experience.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting of using memories of the past, and then that affects the present and the future. And again, it has an impact. You said about returning to the past, and I couldn't not ask you about this concept before. We kind of finish with a few more questions, but I couldn't not get to this. It was the idea of time travel. And this kind of applies to UAP, the UFO phenomenon that I mentioned earlier. Some people, including Dr. Michael Masters, have a theory that these UFOs could be piloted by essentially future humans who have come back to the past to analyze their ancestors and study their ancestors.
Wasn't there an episode of Star Trek based on that idea?
Probably. I'm not sure. Star Trek, I've been told off by some of my viewers that I need to watch it because I haven't actually seen Star Trek.
Yeah, there definitely was.
But yeah, so do you have any thoughts on the idea of time travel and the idea that sometime maybe in the future we'll be able to physically go back to the past? Will humans one day be able to do that?
Well, I think in theory it is possible, because I think the past does still exist. I think the past is still alive. It's still there. It's still happening right here in the present, just as the future is already happening. And that is what we'd expect if time is spatial. That's what life reviews suggest. Life reviews suggest that, those past experiences are still happening. They're still alive somehow. And precognition suggests that and life previews suggest that the future is already there. Even if it's not completely predetermined, it's still there. So, I mean, it's difficult because, physical time travel is different from the kind of the experiential time travel which takes place within our consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure whether physical time travel would be possible. I guess, there are theories in physics which talk about wormholes, when you can go back to different places in time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think the time travel, which is probably most significant in relation to my book, is, the time travel that takes place in different states of consciousness when we become aware of different past experiences or different future experiences.
Yeah.
But in terms of retrocognition, there are many cases where people return to earlier phases of their lives or return to earlier phases in human history, which they were not personally involved with. So in theory, when they return to those moments, again, it's not really clear whether they are physically involved in the situations or just observing them. I guess, in order to change the situations, you have to be physically involved rather than just an observer.
Mm-hmm. You said that you kind of think that the past and the future and everything is all happening, now, and it's all the present and everything like that. Do you think that in the sense that it's physical, or you just mean in the sense of in our consciousness? How do you perceive that? Because obviously if it was physical, then you're going down the kind of idea of these, multiverse, multiple universes, maybe everything happening in a different way. In this universe, I decided to make this decision out of two. In another one, I went the other way, and that kind of idea. Are you anywhere like that? Or are you meaning purely in our consciousness, all these things are alive?
Not just in our consciousness. I think, there is a kind of ontological level, fundamental level of reality where everything that's ever happened is still happening, and everything that will happen is already happening. I don't think it's just in our minds. I think it's in reality. I think, we live in a kind of, what we experience is a kind of superficial level of reality. And in certain altered states of consciousness, we seem to be able to dive into a deeper level of reality. And that's when, in some cases we get access into this to the spatial realm of time. And I think it is basically the fundamental condition of the universe is timelessness. Time is, it is an illusion which is created by our normal state of consciousness. Certainly linear time, the sense that time is moving forward and we're moving away from the past towards the future. That it doesn't seem to have any basis in terms of the fundamental level of reality. It seems to be purely created by our minds. And it's like wearing spectacles. We wear these spectacles of perception and we perceive linear time. But when we take off the spectacles, then we're in this fundamentally timeless realm.
Yeah. And I guess if we were in that fundamentally timeless realm, we can kind of increase or decrease our perception of time. So like, can we do that? Can we induce like these experiences? Can we intentionally speed up or slow down our experience of time?
To a degree, I mean, we do this to an extent habitually anyway. We know
Yeah.
that if we want to make time pass quickly, you got to absorb your attention in a film. If you're on a plane, you want to make time pass quickly, so you watch films, you read magazines, you chat to the person next to you, just to make time pass faster. And you also know that there's some things you can do to slow down time on this kind of mild level. This kind of ordinary experiential level. If you want to, I think, but that's one of the reasons why people go on holiday to strange places. They want to expand time by plunging themselves into unfamiliarity. So we definitely do that on that kind of mild level. We do change our perception of time. And we can certainly do things to intentionally do things to slow down time. As we said before, you can expose yourself to a lot of new experiences. You can cultivate a kind of mindful, fresh perception of your surroundings, which offsets the normal speeding up of time we experience as we get older. But I think, we can potentially create time expansion experiences. We can induce or cultivate an altered state of consciousness in which time slows down radically. And I think some sports people do this through concentration, through intense concentration. Some martial artists do it through meditation, intense focus. And I think this is, it's quite common in martial arts for people to comment on a slowing down of time. And there are certain practices of martial arts that you can only cultivate or successfully practice by slowing down time. Slowing down time enhances your ability to perform in martial arts. So yeah, we can follow certain practices. I mean, I think following a meditative lifestyle will cause a mild time expansion. And we mentioned earlier that certain people who undergo spiritual awakening, they comment on a slowed down sense of time. So living a generally spiritual lifestyle can slow down time in a general sense. And there are certain meditative, contemplative practices we can follow to induce time expansion experiences.
Yeah, awesome. Are there any kind of overall overwhelming thoughts that you have on the nature of time that you haven't already shared today? Is there anything that you wanted to get to that I haven't asked you the right question to open it up, or is there anything that's left unsaid?
Well, the only sort of other element I'd like to emphasize maybe is that time and space seem to be deeply interconnected. In a normal state of consciousness, sorry?
Space-time, the idea of
Well, yeah,
space-time.
in physics, but also psychologically too.
Yeah.
Our normal sense of time is bound up with a sense of duality. Now, our normal experience is to feel ourselves to be entities living inside our own mental space in duality with a world which seems to be out there. And that sense of separation is connected to our normal sense of linear time, kind of our normal sense of fast-flowing linear time. But when we get into altered states of consciousness, there is always an alteration of our spatial perception. So we generally lose that sense of separation. We feel that we're no longer trapped inside our mental space. We're somewhere out there. So people often comment on that in time expansion experiences. They often feel as though they're not inside themselves, they're part of their surroundings, or even they may be kind of watching themselves from above in overview. So in that sense, our normal sense of time is created by a sense of duality. So to transcend our normal sense of time means to transcend duality. It means to expand our identity into our surroundings. And that fits with the philosopher Kant. He always said that time and space are interconnected psychologically. They are constructs created by our minds. And as you said, it fits with the theory of space-time in physics too.
Yeah. If I can ask you just one last question, it would be how, based on everything that you've researched, experienced, learnt, and gleaned from these people you've spoken with, how should we define time? Like in, like in a summary, like in a kind of dictionary, one-liner or 2-3-liner if you must, but in a kind of, summarized, how would you, sum it up?
I would say that time is a construct created by our normal state of consciousness, and we impose it on the world in order to bring order to our experience.
Yeah.
But
nice.
But yeah, you take the analogy of spectacles, but we can use the constructs of time. It can be useful to plan the future, to order our experience, but at certain moments we should be able to take off the spectacles and plunge into a world of time expansion, and even dive into the fundamental timelessness of the universe.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a great definition, and it made me think of the idea of, like, to us, like the day of the week is important, the time on the clock is important, the month, everything like this. But to wildlife, to nature, to animals, and everything like that, means literally nothing, does it? Time is nothing. Time, it doesn't exist to them because they have no perception of it. So the days of the week, the months, everything. Yeah. As you say, it's a construct. It's a human construct that we've created, and we, as you say, look through. Yeah, I agree. Actually, I think to them, time is spatial to them. It is this kind of expansive realm in which they live, without pressure or urgency to do anything in particular, just allowing events to unfold naturally. Yeah,
I think there are some human societies who have a similar attitude. Some indigenous cultures who don't have the same sense of linear time that we do. For them, time is more spatial.
Yeah, the closest thing would be the sun, like to these kind of societies and different species. Like the closest thing to recording time and seeing time in that sense would be like, maybe an animal. I prefer to hunt at night because that's because that's how I roll. But yeah, like different perceptions. But they have the sun, whereas we have a million different labels that we put on this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, or maybe they have a cyclical notion because the return of the seasons, return of day and night.
Yeah, sure. Again,
yeah, completely different from we just divide the day into so many different units and
yeah. Absolutely. Look, this has been great, Steve. I really appreciate all the time you've given me and everything you've shared. I can't wait to read the book. Remind me when it's coming out, and please also, if you have any last words or message you want to leave with people, please go ahead and do that.
The book is coming out at the beginning of November, and I end up by suggesting that many of us in our lives feel pressurized by time. We feel that time is an enemy, that it's running away from us, that it's kind of, we feel pressurized by deadlines and so forth. But essentially time is illusory. So, why should you feel oppressed by an illusion? There's nothing there to feel oppressed by. So time is not your enemy because time doesn't really exist.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. Much, much appreciated. I look forward to talking again in the future. And again, I recommend everybody read your books. I mean, I can't speak for all of them, although I'm sure they're all great, but Disconnected and The Adventure, incredibly important books, particularly, with the chaos in the world right now. So please get Steve's books via the link in the description and to your website. That'll be the link. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Great talking to you. Cheers.
Thank you to Steve Taylor for talking with me again. Thank you to our amazing patrons for helping us to keep the podcast alive, and thank you for listening. Please see the description for relevant links, including to Steve's books and other interviews you might enjoy. Please subscribe to continue unraveling the universe with us, and if you want to help us keep putting out content, please consider a monthly contribution via Patreon. Thank you.